See just the full Everybody see just the full screen? Okay,
Yes.
perfect. Okay, hello again. Thanks again for having us today. For those who I haven't met, my name is Lucille Boss. I'm in a new role with the county, so newly created role. It's the Encampment Response Coordinator, and it's been about a month and a half. So in this role, I'll be tracking reports of encampments, deploying our county's encampment response team. I'll coordinate interventions and manage logistics whenever there is a closure recommended on county-owned or county-controlled sites. But today I'll be briefly reviewing the encampment response protocol and the overarching strategy. Both of these were approved by the County Board of Supervisors last August. And I'll review some of the progress that we've made in the first 6 months. And then I'll also talk a bit about the California Encampment Response or Encampment Resolution Fund. This funding was announced back in February. So the strategy, the response protocol, the encampment resolution fund, they're all distinct, but they are closely interlinked. So I'll do my best to distinguish between them. For clarity, the encampment response protocol and team provide the framework and specifics of assessing encampments and intervening. And the strategy addresses unsheltered homelessness through best practices, recognizing the complexity of the needs of the persons who are experiencing homelessness. It invests limited resources wisely and results in long-term solutions for persons living in encampments. Some of the principles, in case you have not read through the full protocol and strategy, are some of these principles are specific to addressing encampments and really informed the development of the protocol and strategy. So one, it's not healthy or safe for people to live unsheltered. Two, low barrier pathways to permanent housing, and this can include emergency shelter, bridge housing, and rapid rehousing, are the best solution to addressing encampments. And we want to acknowledge that people may sleep or live in encampment settings alone or as a collective for many reasons, and that could include a sense of community and safety. But fourth, we also want to acknowledge community member concerns about encampments within their neighborhoods, including those related to health, sanitation, and safety, especially should be addressed. The county's encampment response protocol and team will be deployed in homeless encampments located specifically on property owned or controlled by Santa Barbara County. And the goal of the protocol is to resolve campsites. The strategy provides that alternative shelter will be accepted by a high percentage of the persons who are living in the resolved encampments. And the overall shelter, housing, and services outlined in the encampment resolution strategy are really of benefit countywide. So we're working on a countywide context and perspective. But as I think most of you know, resolving encampments requires a coordinated vision backed by intense one-on-one engagement and increased investment in shelter and housing. So the county's 3-year effort is aimed at increasing access to shelter, leveraging long-term rental subsidies, creating new permanent housing units, ensuring robust outreach and engagement, and sustaining adequate funding. And this is all in order to resolve encampments. For folks who have also seen our presentations on the Phase 2 Community Action Plan, all of the components in the resolution strategy are consistent with that adopted plan. The encampment response protocol was developed in reviewing best practices and encampment strategies approved by other communities. We didn't want to recreate the wheel. In addition, the county's community services department convened a series of meetings with county departmental staff who are impacted by encampments and received input from county department directors through the Homeless Interagency Policy Council, also from community stakeholders through special meetings of elected leaders forums and the COVID-19 homelessness task force. The purpose of the protocol was to provide an increased clarity and coordination around encampment response, again, in county-owned or county-controlled properties. And all of our interventions are based on health and safety risks, available resources, and alternate shelter capacity. The use of the procedural framework, so you can see kind of a draft outline here, really helps to ensure that roles and responsibilities are defined, that there's coordination and management of limited resources, there's prioritization of encampments based on defined criteria. There's consistency of procedures, and the collection of data and metrics to measure the effectiveness of reducing encampments are considered. And the framework here takes you through the steps from encampment being reported or observed all the way through resolution. And on the slide on the left-hand side here, you can see a few additional actions that are still needed. So we do need identification of additional home key sites. You've probably heard about a couple of successful sites, one in Lompoc and then one that is coming soon in Goleta, but we haven't yet identified a site in the city of Santa Barbara. We also need funding to support and expand outreach and shelter. And we also continue to expand fulcrum mapping software. So right now it's anybody who is covered by the coordinated entry system or homeless management information system release of information is included in fulcrum, but we're planning to expand that for others who do outreach who may not be part of CES or HMIS. I want to give an update on the progress since August 31st, which was again when the board approved the encampment resolution strategy. So following that approval, the Community Services Department appointed a temporary encampment response coordinator. So that was me with 5 other job duties. So I'm very excited that I only have 2 main job duties now starting in early May. We've also contracted with Quick Response for sanitation services and continued existing street outreach contracts. So I think CityNet is on here and they are the holder of one of those street outreach contracts, especially focusing on encampments. For folks who aren't familiar, Quick Response holds current certifications and licenses that are relevant to handling hazardous materials and waste streams, including hazardous material hauler licensing, and has worked to really humanely resolve encampments and remove excess debris and waste alongside the county and homeless service providers. County staff will be returning to the Board of Supervisors at the end of the summer to address expanded street outreach through ARPA or the American Rescue Plan Act, and that'll especially support Good Samaritan Shelter and the multidisciplinary team. And we'll also be returning to the board with a contract for the California Encampment Resolution Fund to expand street outreach with CityNet focused on the transit corridor. Some of the encampment response activities as of March 31st, so that was our 6-month mark, we had 60 encampments and 8 primary clusters resolved, and that included actions by Caltrans and cities, but county-led efforts to resolve encampments took place in 5 of the clusters that you can kind of see here on the screen. That was in Orchid, Isla Vista, Montecito, and an area around Patterson Avenue and Goleta Beach. Most of the identified encampments in Mid and North County are on Caltrans property or within city boundaries. So we are working with those jurisdictions as well. And for folks who aren't familiar, I think you've all been pretty familiar with Salesforce, but Fulcrum is also is updated in real time, and site visits and site statuses change really day to day following outreach. So I'll zoom in a little bit to South County. Because we, again, with the countywide perspective, we're always looking at north, mid, and south. But for this group, I'll do south. So that to us includes Goleta, Isla Vista, Santa Barbara, Montecito, Summerlin, and Carpinteria. So in that area, we have 328 records. So that's 328 sites. 77 of them, as of March 31st, were inactive or abandoned, and 118 had been removed or cleared, and 120 were reported active, engaged, or enrolled in services. And there were also 37 vehicle areas. I think folks here have heard a bit from Heal the Ocean in past meetings as well, but in case you haven't, Heal the Ocean is a community-based environmental organization, and they've provided regular surveys of encampments in South County, which has been really helpful to us. I do not have a drone nor a permit to fly it over the ocean or over the beach, so what they do is they provide detailed surveys and mapping of homeless encampment sites. And this actually predates the full use of mapping software by the county. And their surveys have actually demonstrated a reduction from 102 camps in February of last year to 55 camps in August of last year. So they continue to do those surveys a couple of times of the year. And anytime there's a new encampment, we'll add it to the Fulcrum mapping software and deploy outreach as well. They do continue to note extreme levels of trash and refuse in encampment areas, but we are excited about their reports or their observations of a sustained lower number of encampments, and we have been working to remove any abandoned or inactive sites. We also continue to work on using data to inform our approaches. So all of the data that we get from Fulcrum, any reports that we get from the city, from Salesforce, and anything that we get from Heal the Ocean helps as we pivot really to action and increase or improve any communication and coordination. I want to get into the California Encampment Resolution funding. So as folks hopefully know, the County of Santa Barbara was recently awarded about $2.5 million for encampment resolution, and this is along the transportation or transit corridor. This is aimed at preventing fire, injury, and death from pedestrian strikes. 1.5 million of this award will be used for 75 beds of interim housing. So we are considering sites in South County and in North County for that interim housing. And this application was in collaboration with Union Pacific Railroad, Caltrans, and the cities of Goleta, Santa Barbara, Santa Maria, and Lompoc. And that was really critical to the successful application. So we're thrilled to have that group working together on this effort. The state announced awards at the end of February, and we let the state know that we want to be an early adopter, meaning we want to start the work of improving our work as soon as possible. But early adopter meant that I think we just launched a couple of weeks ago. So unfortunately, everything tends to take longer than we want it to. But looking forward, pending Board of Supervisors approval, a contract with CityNet for street outreach, including transportation and client assistance, dedicated to the transit corridor will begin likely in July. And the county is currently working on a memorandum of understanding with the partners. So with cities, county, Caltrans, and Union Pacific, with a focus on access to sites and strengthening that coordination. We're also launching a 100-day challenge to address homelessness specific to the transit corridor throughout the county. So the city of Santa Barbara is represented in that effort, as is CityNet and a few other key partners. So that 100-day challenge basically motivates us to pick an unreasonable goal and then meet that goal in 100 days. So a couple of examples. Our community did one that was focused on youth, and our goal was to house 50 youth in 100 days, which is an unreasonable goal based on our current or our past practices. And we housed 52 youth in that 100 days. And that was in part thanks to partners really just stepping up or bringing in new partners who haven't been engaged in the past. We also hosted a 100-day challenge focused on housing veterans. And our goal was to house 75 veterans in 100 days. And I think we surpassed that just after the 100-day mark. But again, it was bringing in different partners who haven't been engaged to realize that, instead of complaining about something, they wanted to take that energy and put it into action. So they focused on the 100-day challenge and made that successful. So we're looking forward to that with our 100-day challenge focused on the transit corridor as well. I like to show this because a lot of times we are asked, how do we end homelessness or what can we do right now? So we can really boil it down to a need for more shelter beds, more affordable housing, and adequate supportive services. But we also need to focus on the immediate needs of our system. So additional rental units, staffing capacity, and sites for future development. And I want to end on an example that's specific to Upper State Street before I shift over to the city. So I think this group has heard a lot of concerns about encampments around Upper State Street and the 154 overpass. And I think this is, while it's still a work in progress, it's an example of successful coordination and collaboration. Those are the terms that the state likes to give us all the time. So there were a lot of different agencies engaged, different departments from the city of Santa Barbara, Caltrans, different departments in the county, MTD, CityNet, Behavioral Wellness, New Beginnings, and I'm sure that I'm forgetting other partners. But a lot of times when Well, when you are closing an encampment or removing an encampment without adequate shelter, without adequate services, without adequate housing, the person is just displaced and they move 50 yards away or they move across the street and it doesn't solve anything, which is incredibly frustrating. And I think we all see that in our community. So instead of just displacing people and moving them along, in this case, SETINET worked with behavioral wellness and with New Beginnings to make sure that the clients were supported and were moved into adequate shelter and into housing. So that's how you solve homelessness. I'll go back to that last slide of, we need shelter and services and housing. And I just want to appreciate everybody who had a part in resolving the encampments that, again, are still work in progress on Upper State Street around the 154 overpass. So we had a lot of folks committed to making sure that we weren't just displacing people in this case, and that we were moving them into adequate shelter and housing, and making sure that they were paired with the appropriate supportive services as well. And that's what we need a lot more of. So I think I went over my time, but I will stop sharing and turn it over to, I think, the city or SB Act.
So thanks, Lucille. Hopefully everyone can hear me now. Kelly, can you give me a thumbs up? On my iPhone, can you not hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, Jeff.
Okay, good. Sorry, that's the first time I had a computer crash during a Zoom call, so my apologies. And I just wanted to take a moment to thank you, Lucille, for all the information. And the purpose of the call was to try to help the Upper State Street region understand the encampment response, both from the county and the city, and how those teams are collaborating and working together, and some clarity on who the community can contact first. What's the process? Because oftentimes people on Upper State don't know the jurisdiction that we're talking about. So that was the original focus of this meeting, because I didn't want to do a site visit related to an encampment. We'll revisit the site visit piece for the next Upper State Street wrap. But most of the concerns that I were hearing about were kind of encampment response related. So Lucille, I think you answered a lot of the questions.
And I can add in that I feel like we have a good relationship with the city. I like the city. I'm a city resident. And I think you have some really great staff and leadership in the city. So when there is an encampment, and I think we're pretty good about communicating about an outreach need or about an issue that's been reported to the wrong jurisdiction. So thank you to our city partners.
No, that's really good and valuable. And I think Liz has a question. How can reports then be submitted to the county, Lucille?
Yeah, you can email me. I will put my email in the chat.
Are there other questions that that was one of the questions I think that I received from community members based on encampments. There might be a question just around the timeliness of responses, right? When sometimes people don't see it happen right away, which is understandable. Do you have advice for them?
Yeah.
Or do you?
So I typically outreach is deployed usually, I would say, within 48 hours. A lot of outreach staff have staggered hours or staggered work days because they're working from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. So it may be a Friday that they are off if they're working like a 980 schedule, for example. But somebody is typically visiting the site within 48 hours. Unfortunately, I think what a lot of community members want is they want that encampment gone. They want what they're seeing gone. And that's, it takes a lot longer to actually get people housed, especially when we have a 1% vacancy rate in rental units. And our fair market rent in our county is $2,200 for a unit. So it takes longer to resolve an encampment because we don't have enough affordable housing and we don't have enough shelter or services. But at least outreach typically goes out within that 48 hours. And I'll typically send a follow-up email to whoever has reported a concern.
Thank you. Mayor Rouse.
Yeah, hi. So I appreciate Lucille's efforts. I appreciate the attention towards the encampments. And I understand the issues behind the housing and the dearth of housing and whatnot. My priorities, obviously, for the city are going to be to provide health and human safety. And one of the problems with having to say, we don't move anybody until we have a housing situation is you have a clear and present danger every day. And that's what the reactions are. When people see the fires in the encampments, they see the other problems that have to do with sanitation and whatnot are bad enough as well. So our immediate response is really critical. And and as we know, it's not a static population, it's a dynamic population. It comes and goes, moves in, moves out. People from all over the place. So it's hard because we clear an encampment out and we try to maintain it, and then we don't maintain it, it fills again. But if we're backlogged on placing people in some kind of temporary shelter or housing, my question is, what coordination, if anything, do we have with PATH, which is our temporary shelter? And I realize it's not where everybody wants to go, but we do need to get people out of places where fires can happen, where there's obviously very, very dangerous situations. And I think, clearly we're getting ready to open the new, or have opened, I guess, the dignity moves, and we'll see how that goes. But there's going to be a backfill in the encampments, and we know that. What's our strategy outside of getting queued up for housing, or is there one outside of that?
I can answer from the county perspective of the protocol. So we do have different measures that we use to assess sites. So that's based on health, safety, size, and location, and that will determine the interventions. And that's done in by the encampment response team. So that's with fire, with law enforcement, public works, environmental agencies, and CityNet or other outreach providers. So if it is something where it is an immediate danger, then that would likely be recommended for an immediate intervention, such as making sure that the person is moving into shelter or housing, and closing and clearing the remaining debris. In most cases that we have assessed so far, fire does some education, and they will say that, yes, this is dangerous to everybody. They may also recommend ongoing case management or have more fire inspectors go out and provide additional education.
No, and I appreciate that. It's my top priority is going to be health and human safety for the people in Santa Barbara. So I appreciate that answer.
Thank you, Mayor Rouse, and thank you, Lucille. We originally had Lorraine Cruz Carpenter scheduled to be on the call, but she's had a family emergency, so she can't be on the call. So I'm wondering, I see Aaron from the fire department on the call, and I know historically, Aaron, you've talked about contacting who to contact if the public feels there is a fire danger or they see something within encampments and kind of alerts them. Do you want to speak briefly to that in the fire department response?
Yeah. So generally, if the general public has a concern about the fire danger, we encourage them to go through the city site, the link through Chris. Chris generally forwards all that information over to us, and as soon as we get it, we get out to that location and kind of check it out and see what's going on. If we do have, like I said, if we do have any type of fire damage, we'll try to we'll try to educate as much as possible and remove what we can if it's an immediate threat. But for us, I mean, we do have people randomly kind of call here from time to time, but for the most part, everybody seems to be using the link that Chris has, and it comes straight through, and it seems to be very effective in getting out.
And I saw, Chris, you popped on, so you probably wanted to affirm that process.
Yes, absolutely. And I would just encourage you to give everyone again to utilize that link. I'll throw it in the chat here in a minute. That gets us, whether it's something that's a fire concern or not, we want to know about it. We want to be able to get the resources to those people. We want to be able to assess the safety of that particular situation. So if you see something, whether it's a fire concern or not, if you see an encampment or you see an individual in need, report it to the city so that we can get resources out there as quickly as we can.
And I think Al, Emily, you're part of the CityNet kind of coordinated outreach teams related to both county and city encampment. So I don't know if there's anything you want to share as well. I'll open the mic to you that you think the community should know.
Thanks, Jeff. I just
Well, with this, I have to say, since go ahead, Em.
I didn't have any specific updates. I was just going to say we're really excited that we've partnered with the county in terms of our county contract for encampment outreach in those designated areas. And we're also excited to be continuing with the PLHA grant, which covers city generalized outreach within the city of Santa Barbara. So it'll be an interesting summer and we can't wait to get started on that work. So Al has a little bit more of local updates for any efforts on Upper State Street if you wanted to give those now.
Yeah, as far as the updates, has touched on, the major concern that we were largely a part of the Upper State Street 154. Any encampments that might be currently residing in that area, we're consistently and continuously working on. We do have a team that is making it out there and making contact, have been engaging in services. We have made, I would say, definitely a movement with those encampments that were actually happened, which has, changed the dynamic of the area. We'll continue doing that. And as far as, I would say us getting out there, I would have to say, since I've definitely been involved as more recently and will continuously be the person to make contact with in this general region. The emails that we've been receiving, the phone calls that I've been getting is the best way. And the communication has been very strong from city and county side. I love seeing these meetings and hearing how we're all coming together, because that's the only way we're going to be able to solve these concerns. So just the continued progress and continued communication with us all, having these meetings to come up with solutions is the key. But as far as the strength of the communication right now, it is only continuing to grow stronger. From Chris Clark, from the fire department, from SBPD to the community, and both city and county have been getting direct contact with us, and including myself directly, so we can get our teams out there when these emergencies arise, along with other concerns that do take sometimes 24 to 48 hours, depending on how large the concern is. Of course, they're all something that we want to get to, but as we know, some do rise very quick, and we are able to make those contacts, I would say, usually in a very timely manner. So continue going to the site. I know with Salesforce, continue contacting anyone in the community, including myself, through email, by phone, and I do make myself much available to get to these concerns quickly and take care of them as much as possible. So, but if there are any questions in regards to areas that might be of concern, I'm definitely willing to give some feedback on any of those. But for right now, I know we've been a large focus was the 154, which we have been very much in sight, and we have been very much available.
Thanks, Al. I'm thinking for the simplicity of the kind of community members, it sounds like the best practice is for them to use the encampment link to report anything they see, and that the city, if it's not within their jurisdiction, will work with the county kind of collectively as a team to mobilize the right team into the right encampment, and that we just need to help the Upper State Street community know what they have in place. That's kind of what I'm picking up. And we will send this. Barbara, you signed on, so you might have something to share too. I see you turned your video on.
I think I was just hoping for some specifics in regards to the new funding from the state. I met with Secretary Ramirez last week, and I know Lucille and the team at the county met with her as well. How does this increase the capacity of the county to be more responsive to jurisdictional high priority encampment needs?
Sure. So I'll actually share were you on when I showed kind of the budget?
Yes, yeah, but just in translating it, especially for residents in our area, of how does that increase the number of outreach teams, increase resources for housing or transitional temporary housing options, or again, just being able with that additional capacity to prioritize more I would say the encampment listings that have been identified by each jurisdiction.
Sure. So I think one big piece of it will be that MOU. So we have a better practice in place for communicating when there are new reports of encampments. And the 100-day challenge will really help with that, because that team will work together in a weekly meeting. So they'll be talking about what are the priority encampments for this week or this month or this 100 days, and what resources are available to them, and who would be best to serve those encampments. But so it will increase outreach teams. So we will have street outreach housing navigators who all they will do is focus on that transit corridor throughout the county.
Is that going from 0 to a team of 2 or 2 teams of 2? I think it would be helpful to say this is the increased additional capacity with $2 million, $2.5 million in funding.
Gotcha. So the staffing is $800,000 over the course of 2 years. So that's salaries, benefits,
Right.
and that contract will also include funding for transportation and for client services and that direct assistance. And that's going to CityNet. So that will have 4 case managers dedicated solely to that transit corridor. And they'll work in partnership with the county's expanded multidisciplinary team. And that multidisciplinary team includes public defender, behavioral wellness, and public health. So it's really dedicating people to serving that transit corridor. It also dedicates funding to interim housing. So that's, when you want to resolve an encampment, you need to move somebody to that adequate housing or shelter. So this is funding which the county will be leveraging some other funding to stand up that interim housing. And then we also have funding for environmental rehabilitation. So following resolution of encampments, we'll be putting out an RFP probably later this summer, early fall, to make sure that any damage that was done, that area is restored. So it's rather than expanding, it's dedicating staff specifically to that transit corridor. We have other funding that is expanding street outreach throughout the county as well.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Lucille. Can you define that building upon the interim housing, what you're actually looking at trying to accomplish? As you kind of have brought up the idea that if you're going to move people out of the encampment, you want to have that in place. Does that mean, what does that mean increasing? How are you going to increase that? And are you also trying to just get people connected to housing directly from encampments?
Yes, to all of the above. So interim housing, a couple of examples can be hotel rooms, but they can also be like the pallet shelters. So like Dignity Moves, like what we did in Isla Vista and is now in Lompoc. So that RFP will probably go out early in the summer. So it's basically a place to get people out of the out from outside to inside, while they're also working on the document readiness process. Our county, both of our housing authorities, our county housing authority and city housing authority, were also awarded additional emergency housing vouchers. We're dedicating some state funding to rapid rehousing. So there are other resources to help with that direct rental assistance and financial assistance as well. But we still need more units built or developed.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate you pulling together all the funding streams to do all of that. I mean, people have just recently sent me, how Houston has brought their numbers down, and it was moving people from encampments to housing. So having that solution in hand. Just hoping the timing of all that kind of coincides, right? So appreciate that in your planning process. Are there any other questions or comments? So we are going to put this on YouTube. We'll push it out to all of our partners so they can this education about the county's approach will go out to everyone, and we will simplify the process for the upper state partners to understand kind of who to contact and what to expect. And then we're going to try to plan on a site visit if it's not an encampment related site moving forward for the upper state region. Barbie, do you have another question or thought?
I'm wondering if there could be, again, just further clarification on determining the level of urgency and prioritization. So I know, that Lucille was so great in providing the detail of how encampments are assessed in terms of being able to triage what is on the list, what is the highest priority, but sometimes that does conflict with how the city of Santa Barbara would assess an encampment in terms of its impacts and where we would prioritize that. How is that reconciled? And could we have more conversations about making kind of that prioritization matrix a little bit more similar?
Yes, that is exactly what we're planning to do with the MOU process.
Great.
So the starting framework will be, the starting framework was the county's encampment response protocol, which includes those the pieces of assessment and also the interventions. But then we built on that after conversations with all the partners in this grant, and we'll continue to build on that as every city's attorney adds to it, and Union Pacific adds to it, and state legislators add to it too.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, Lucille, for your availability. Thank you, everyone, for your questions, and Barbara for your clarifying questions on all this. Very helpful for everyone. Any further questions, please reach out to me, Jeff@sbac.org, and we'll send this out to everyone. So thanks, everyone, for hopping on.